John Marshall Law School Restorative Justice Project was started about 2 years ago for two basic reasons. Everyone knows that incarcerating persons is not working and that the criminal justice system is broken. The John Marshall Law School Restorative Justice Project is attempting to stop the pipeline between the schools and the prisons.
I fully realize, as the first Hispanic chief judge of this district, the statistics that we're dealing with, especially in the criminal justice arena. Most of the criminal defendants that we are processing here at the federal court are racial or ethnic minorities. I think a big educational effort needs to be undertaken. I applaud John Marshall for leading that charge.
Our justice system often is less about justice than it is about breaking the rules. So in other words, a person who's charged with a crime is charged with breaking a rule, and that rule is a statute, that rule is a criminal code, but that's between the state who fostered that code and that individual offender. The problem is we miss the point. Justice is about people who have been harmed. And in almost every statute, someone has been harmed. If you break into somebody's house and take their TV set, that's a harm that is against an individual. And prosecuting a child or adult for that crime, sending them to prison, charging them with a fine, putting them on probation, may be an effective response, an appropriate response to that rule breaking, but it doesn't resolve the harm to that individual who lost something. That could be property, it could be injury, it could be peace of mind.
I do think that people now have come around to the way of thinking that the strategy, if you want to call it that, of just locking everybody up is not a really good one and hasn't shown a lot of success. Every study that has been agreed as accurate, noted, and authoritative says that you need to intervene early if you're going to make an impact with people. So we're getting people really down at the far end of it, which makes it trickier. Not impossible, makes it trickier. Intervention and intervention strategies on the front end are the ones that have the highest potential for success. And where do you usually have that connection between a individual, frankly a juvenile, who is starting to go the wrong way? Where do you have that connection with them and some source of authority that can intervene and do well? More often not the schools. Thoughtful people understand restorative justice models are the way that are going to work with them to get them back into the community, become assets in the community, become, in some areas, pillars of the community.
And that if we don't start showing our children a different way to handle conflict, we'll lose them to the crib to prison pipeline.
Traditionally, we had always looked at punitive punishment, which meant detention, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. And what that did is it gives a lot of punitive, very much like what happens when they become adults. And if you end up going to jail, those are the same type of punishments that you're receiving there. So again, we were repeating exactly what they would see if they became adults. The problem is they're not adults.
Restorative justice is really about relationships. It's about holding people accountable for the harm that they've caused, not just the law that they broke. And it's something that really supports victims.
Peacemaking Circle is a practice of restorative justice. And restorative justice is a philosophy, basically a worldview that says when there is a harm done, or when there's a crime or some sort of conflict, that restorative justice looks at the harm done, how do we repair the harm, and who was harmed. So it really tends to the victim and calls upon us as community, and in particular the person who did the harm, to kind of help repair the harm. In what we say oftentimes in restorative justice is, what we strive to do is what you would want to do if it was your child. If it was your child who got in trouble, how would you want to respond? And how would you want the system to respond? And usually We want our children to be held accountable, but we don't want them demeaned or labeled as a menace to society. And that's what the circle can do. And I constantly say this to the schools, to the courts, to the police, to the sheriffs. I say this has got to be a community-led operation. What we're working toward is a restorative community, so that schools would be restorative, the community itself would be restorative, the park system would be restorative, even the police, who constantly tell us that this schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, this, using the police every time an incident happens in school and the kid then has a case, they're the most frustrated with this. And so they really want the schools to have a restorative kind of philosophy because they can deal with some of this in the house.
Being in my first circle, like I said, I was more held back, and I was kind of nervous just to express myself in a deeper way. So, but as we went around, we introduced ourselves, and I heard the stories of some of the other guys. I got in that comfort zone, like, oh, okay, so maybe this isn't as bad as I thought it was. And I got into the comfort zone of I can express myself in that way. And actually, after I did express myself in that way, I felt so much better and relieved about myself because I didn't have all this stuff that I've been bottling up for years.
But like, if it's hard to sit in a circle with your peers and talk about something that you did wrong because you're going to have to be accountable for it. So it's a way to be accountable and a way to be really responsible and step up to the plate for something that you've done wrong, and it's just a better alternative to a lot of the different things that we're doing in school systems now.
The kids have already admitted that they've broken a rule before they ever come to peer jury. So when they come to peer jury, it's about repairing the harm. It's restating the rule that was broken, and yes, I did it, and then how are we going to repair that? And we're here to help you do that.
But there's intermittent tears and laughter all in the same. It's so healthy. It just feels healthy when you see these people interact with one another.
I think restorative practices make sense to kids. They're not as cluttered. Their ideas aren't as cluttered as adults, and they're more open to change, I think. And it seemed logical to them that they know their peers, and they know that when kids are suspended, it's a day out of school. It isn't a punishment. And so holding kids accountable and asking them to repair the harm that they've caused is a different concept, and they can see that it works. So it was an easy sell for our students.
As soon as I learned about the restorative justice, it clicked for me right away because I knew that being a first responder, I'm going to be making contact with a lot of people. I'm the first person who they're going to be talking to on the street, and I think that just knowing about restorative justice, maybe that could be the first place where it could be introduced to the victim and the offender.
I kind of created my own restorative justice with the young man who took my sister's life. I wrote to him telling him that I had forgiven him for the crime, and he wrote me back a 15-page letter confessing to the crime for the first time and apologizing. And I said, I'll come see you, I'll come visit you if you want to talk. And he put me on his visiting list, and I've seen him 5 times now. It's been good for me to be able to tell him directly the impact that his actions had, not just on my sister and brother-in-law, but everybody who loved them. Sisters and brothers, parents, community, neighbors, that these ripples of grief went out and out. And to kind of tie that to his obligations now of how he needs to live his life. I think that what I see in the legal system is too few opportunities for dialogue between victims and offenders in a way that could be really helpful for everyone.
As I was working here at Chavez and doing small groups with 8 students, John Marshall, who's trained in restorative justice in the Peace Circle, was able to reach another 8 students, and now we have 8 volunteers, and that's multiplied. And not only is that multiplied, but that follows the siblings, the younger brothers, the older brothers from grade levels and say, hey, did Miss Corona put you in the Peace Circles group? If she hasn't, tell her that you want to be in the same group as I am.
The restorative justice class sort of gives you tools to sort of implement restorative justice, in that you can sort of, develop this better healing process where you don't have to ruin a person's life, just to make, sort of implement justice.
And I guess poverty does strange things to people. They become violent, and they take to the streets and they kill neighbors, friends, and stuff like that. So, yeah. When I took the restorative justice class, I felt that was a way to reach back and kind of like expose me to a way to help people within my community. You do things like peace circles and peer juries and restorative chats with, let's say for instance, people who are gang members that are in the Chicago public schools. And that's something that I never thought you could do, under the guise of the law. Who knew that you could, have an alternative way of dealing with these social ills as opposed to just locking people up and putting them in prison. It teaches you about being forgiving and trying to ameliorate and provide healing to people too. Just being that type of person. So that's why I really believe in restorative justice, and I think that others should definitely get on board with the Restorative Justice Project in the legal community.
As a peer juror, I see that it's being so successful, and I don't know why we aren't using it more in school systems or law or some kind of anything. Like, if we are getting results and they're not, I don't understand why we're not using it more.
After taking restorative justice at John Marshall, I can say that it has opened my eyes, and it has taught me something that I never knew existed. Prior to taking the course, I never knew what restorative justice was. So taking the course and participating at Richards High School taught me a lot. For instance, as I mentioned, since I grew up on the west side of Chicago, I see a lot on a daily basis, from fights to gang activity to everything in between. So restorative justice teaches me that conflicts can be resolved without engaging in physical altercations or being arrested or just engaging in behavior that shouldn't be happening.
In order to pass the course, it's required that you actually leave the law school campus and encounter hands-on experience with the theories taught in the class. Obviously, the guest lectures are very well spoken, and some of them have very moving stories having to do with their personal experiences with the law and how the legal system had failed or succeeded in certain respects. And some of them had very moving things to say, but for me personally, the two things that stuck out from the course are the professor's dedication to the work and also the opportunity to leave the classroom and to experience what it means to practice restorative justice for myself.
Restorative justice asks wider questions. It asks, why did this person do this? What's the effect on the family? Were there other circumstances which could have been addressed that would have prevented the crime or the wrongdoing? And in general, how does society treat the people? Yes, we need punitive justice. Never will I say that a punitive justice system needs to be replaced.
The John Marshall Restorative Justice class really impacted me when I first went to my school site in Southside Chicago, Richards Academy, and it was my first time where I actually went to a school where when it was far more low resource than what I grew up with, and it was definitely eye-opening. I saw metal detectors, I saw
a lot of police officers there, and a lot of them were doing investigations for homicides, for gang activity, and that really impacted me because this class really is firsthand experience, and being able to assist those students and assist administration in implementing restorative justice methods really gave me, I think, an upper hand.
Restorative justice is needed in the civil courts. There are occasions where pro se litigants have claims against each other, or really don't have claims against each other, but they have issues with each other which don't constitute legally cognizable causes of action. And we have an opportunity to resolve those, to help them resolve those so they can go back into the community and not hold that anger or despair or rage or jealousy, which contributes to more trouble in the community.
Many of the defendants who come before judges come from neighborhoods where there's deep trauma, because these children and these adults have witnessed people being killed, people being hurt, being shot by each other, by other young people or adults. They've also witnessed killings by police. So these people come in and they suffer from trauma, which is a medical disorder. They need help for the trauma. And if they don't get help, then they self-medicate. And the self-medication can be done with alcohol, with drugs, whatever it is, it doesn't help the person. We have about 2,000 drug treatment and mental health treatment courts in the country. In a perfect world, every judge would be doing mental health treatment and drug treatment.
Restorative justice cannot be accomplished unless the community is transformed. Thus, restorative justice is really the handmaiden of civil rights. Just as civil rights attempts to secure a just and equitable society, so restorative justice attempts to do the same thing by focusing on victims, offenders, and the community.